Well, thank you very much for joining us for this important and timely symposium. Social Security systems are remarkably resilient, even in times of extreme social trauma, lessons from the Ukraine, which is an approved side event of the 61st meeting of the Commission of Social Development at the United Nations. I'm Donna Butts, Executive Director of Generations United, and a proud member of the National Academy of Social Insurance. And I am humbled and honored to be able to moderate today's session, and just really delighted and grateful to the NGO Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity, the NGO Committee on Aging, and the National Academy of Social Insurance for co-sponsoring today's session. This is the second in a series on social trauma and intergenerational solutions, sponsored by the NGO Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity. Today, we're going to be joined to hear from two speakers who are highly respected professionals, Elaine Foltz and Vasil Kostarosta, who told me I said it right earlier, and I will keep practicing until I get it correct. But they're going to be discussing how Judy's iPad, please mute. Okay, folks, we need you to mute. Thank you, Chelsea. Great. All right. So we're going to be discussing today how Ukraine is maintaining its social security system and other social protection programs in the face of extreme trauma. And I know that we're all very humbled and amazed at the ability of the Ukrainian people to be doing the work that they're doing to make sure that their country continues to support its most vulnerable populations in conditions that most of us could never imagine. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers today. First, we're going to hear for a few minutes from Suzanne Sepperson, who's the acting chair of the NGO Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity. She's going to say a few words. So Suzanne?
Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you to all of you for joining us and for our outstanding speakers, and to all of you. I had this whole list and of titles and so on, but I don't want to repeat everything that we've just said. So welcome to all of you to the second in a series of events on the theme of social trauma and intergenerational solidarity. We thank Generations United, the NGO Committee on Aging New York, the National Academy of Social Insurance, and the NGO Committee on the Family for co-sponsoring this symposium. And a special thank you to Donna and to our outstanding speakers, and to Kevin Brabazon, Generations United Senior Representative to the UN, for making today's program possible. So I thank all of you for joining us. A brief comment on the background of COIGINS, the Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity. We began as a subcommittee of the Committee on Aging New York in 2000 and was approved as the NGO Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity at the 2018 General Assembly of Congo in Geneva. COIGIN's mission is to promote solidarity between generations in families, communities, and nations for the achievement of a society for all ages through education and advocacy of policies affecting economic, social, and political participation and well-being in accordance with the principles of the United Nations, which includes applicable Sustainable Development Goals defined in the 2030 Agenda. Today's program, Social Security Systems are remarkably resilient, even in times of extreme social trauma. Lessons from the Ukraine is particularly relevant to the Sustainable Development Goals, including Goal 1, no poverty, Goal 2, zero hunger, Goal 3, good health and well-being, Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, and Goal 17, partnerships for the goals. COIGIN's previous presentations have shown how extreme poverty can be eliminated amongst older persons and people with disabilities, and poverty rates amongst elders can be dramatically reduced. The meeting today will show the sustainability of Social Security, social protection, and social insurance programs through one of the worst social traumas of all, during wartime. This symposium is the second in the series, Social Trauma and Intergenerational Programs, and the fifth meeting since 2018 that focused on Social Security and related social protection programs. The first in this series was presented recently on November 11th, 2022, titled Eliminating Extreme Poverty and Hunger Amongst Older Person and People with Disabilities by Implementing a Supplementary Income Program, Evidence from a Program in Lalibela, Ethiopia. Since 2019, Coigins has participated in events coordinated by the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, the Committee on the Status of Women, Generations United, and the Committee on Social Development via Zoom events and written statements advocating for strengthening the protection of human rights of older persons, the elimination of poverty among older women, and social and economic aspects of Social Security. At this time, one of the main goals of Coigins is working to convince the United Nations to set up a department that would promote and provide technical assistance to nations who do not have Social Security or social insurance programs in place. On a personal note, I hope that we consider job sharing between older and younger workers and unpaid caregiving, often provided by grandparents, and Social Security as ways to enhance the quality of life for families both economically and socially. In a different vein, coming up on March 16th, 2023, Coigins will take part in an in-person symposium on education sponsored by the Committee on the Status of Women, Forum 67. We will participate in a panel discussion during a parallel event on technology in education, public-private partnerships in Israel, the United States, and Ethiopia. We invite you to join us. The COVID pandemic and the health of the founding chair of Coigins, Dr. Rosa Resnick, brings us to our current circumstance. Through the leadership of Kevin Brabazon, we are embarking on a new phase of the committee, utilizing technology in a way that we have not been able to in the past. Currently, we have plans for a total of 5 programs relating to the theme of social trauma and intergenerational programs. We invite you to become a member of the Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity. Our email is ngocommittee.coigins@gmail.com. Once again, that's one word, ngocommittee.coigins@gmail.com. I will put this in the chat room momentarily. We turn now to our speakers. There will be ample time for Q&A, and we ask that you write your questions in the chat room. Again, thank you for joining us. Donna.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I'd like to, before we begin, thank Suzanne as well as Kevin Brabazon for their service as NGO representatives to the United Nations for Generations United and the leadership that they're showing in the new Committee for Intergenerational Solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Generations United advocates for programs and policies that support connections between generations and that value and engage people at every age and stage of life. Social Security intrinsically is an intergenerational effort. It underpins the social compact, that belief that we give and receive across the course of our lives. Generations United has long advocated for efforts to strengthen Social Security and other social protection programs because they are intergenerational. For example, in the United States, grandparent-headed households, those households where grandparents are raising children, 17% of them live below the poverty level. It's estimated that without Social Security, that number would be well over 50% that would be in poverty. So again, it's such an example of how it supports an entire family and it supports an entire household. But also, it's a program that sometimes we hear that young people, at least in the United States, don't think that Social Security will be there for them. They think they have actually more of that they may be abducted by space aliens before they'd actually receive Social Security. When in fact, almost every child in America is covered by survivor benefits were they to lose a parent to death or disability. So throughout time, these social programs enhance and strengthen the social compact. But we do that under everyday conditions in many countries. And the conditions that our dear colleagues in Ukraine are dealing with are beyond any of our comprehension in so many ways. So I was thrilled to have an opportunity to read a paper that Elaine Foltz and Vasile wrote last year about Ukraine and the social security and social support systems that are enduring because of the commitment and the hard work of people in Ukraine. So I'm thrilled today to be able to introduce you to Elaine Fultz, who's the former director of the International Labor Organization, whose research is focused on gender equality, family policy, disability pensions, and Social Security. Dr. Fultz is a member of the National Academy of Social Insurance and authored the paper I mentioned earlier, co-authored Delivering Social Security in Wartime, Ukraine's Remarkable Innovations with the Academy's CEO, Bill Arnone. She is joined by Vasil Kostorstella, who is with the Association of Employer Organizations of Ukraine, and was the former chief of the International Labor Organization. He has held elected positions in trade unions, including co-chairman of the National Tripartite Council of Social Partnerships. Since 2018, he served as the chairman of the organization where he serves. He also has written several papers, including those with colleagues at the Institute, an Institute for Transformation of National Labor Market, National Employment Policy, and Employment Insurance Legislation, and written papers on the reconstruction of Ukraine. So I am, again, honored and delighted to turn the program over to Elaine and Vasil, who will be sharing information with you. And then, as Suzanne said, please put questions in the chat and be prepared to have a fascinating dialogue with these two incredible experts. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, and Vasil, good evening in Kiev. We're both really, really pleased to have been invited to this meeting, and more than delighted to tell you what we know about Ukraine's truly remarkable innovations in delivering Social Security in wartime. We're really glad that we found each other because NACI, the National Academy of Social Insurance, is keenly interested in this topic, and you guys are coming at it from more of a crisis and trauma perspective, but I think there's a huge overlap in our interests. So today, I want to present to you the main findings of a paper on this topic that I have written with Vasil Kostritsia, who is my former colleague. He was the director of the ILO office in Kiev at the time that I was the Social Security specialist for Central and Eastern Europe. Before we talk about Social Security and the particulars of Ukraine's current experience, Vasil is going to set the context with a few facts and figures on Ukraine as a country and on the war. So Vasil, good evening in Kiev, and the floor is yours.
Good evening to everybody. Thank you, Elaine. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, because picture is not good. So we are still in the conditions of the bad internet. So that's why. Distinguished members of the subcommittee and participants of the meeting, thank you very much for having invited us to speak at your meeting. And it's a great honor and responsibility for Mrs. Elaine Fultz and me to tell you how relevant institutions in Ukraine have acted to protect citizens who find themselves in terrible conditions as a result of Putin's full-scale aggression in Ukraine. Since the first days of the war, the delivery of social protection, along with the defense of Ukraine on the battlefields, have been the main tasks of our government. For a better understanding of the social security side of these dual objectives, let me first say a few words about Ukraine, our independent and sovereign and welfare state. Ukraine is located in the center of Europe, and until February 24, 2022, had more than 42 million women and men, children and the elderly inhabitants. But the war, like a volcano that erupted forced millions of people to leave their homes. The largest flow of people occurred in March-April 2022. It is estimated that more than 11 million persons had to leave their homes. According to the data from the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine, almost 4.9 million internally displaced persons, IDPs, have been registered, of which more than 3.5 million people have moved after February 24, 2022. More than 1.8 million citizens received housing assistance for internally displaced persons. More than 1 million people used the digital service to apply for housing assistance for them. In 2022, Ukraine lost almost 30% of its GDP, around 50% of jobs, and the unemployment rate increased up to 28%. Yes, in spite of this social cohesion, and solidarity are extraordinarily strong. We feel that we are not alone, we are all together. These words resonate with all generations, men and women, old and young in Ukraine. In 2022, the number of the volunteers organizations increased 7 times. Millions of people joined this movement. Everyone is called to be a gift to other people, said Tatiana Stavnicha, president of Caritas Ukraine. Furthermore, international solidarity with governments, international organizations, and NGOs has provided funds and strengthened the social protection system, helping millions Ukrainian people to survive and live in more secure conditions. How the government used these resources creatively and effectively is our topic for today. Thanks.
Thank you, Vasil. And could we have the next slide, please? So this is our roadmap for today, based on Vasil's quick sketch of the situation in Ukraine. We're going to try to address 3 questions. First of all, we're going to enumerate what Ukraine has been doing in Social Security. What are these innovations that we are talking about? And second, we're going to try to account for their successes. We're going to ask what is it about Ukraine that's making it work so well? And third, we're going to touch on the main problems and unmet challenges in the country, the things that Ukraine is aspiring to do in the field of Social Security, but has not achieved yet. Next slide, please. So question number 1, Ukraine's remarkable innovations. What are they? In our paper, we divided these into 3 groups. First, adapting benefits to meet new needs, especially the needs of those internally displaced persons who Vasil was just telling you about. Second, creating new avenues for reaching people. And to me, this is the most exciting and remarkable and innovative part of what I've learned about Ukraine, how they have reached out to find people and reach them with support. And then third, with a war going on, and with using so much of their effort to try to help the population, Ukraine has also approved reforms that boost administrative efficiency, that make scarce dollars go further by spending less on administration and therefore freeing up more money to pay benefits. Next slide, please. So the first of these, we'll go through each one of these ways in which Ukraine has adapted its benefit system. So in the days immediately following the invasion, the government moved extraordinarily quickly to provide help to those who had lost their jobs or lost their homes or were living in areas that were threatened by conflict. And I want to emphasize, they did not wait to pass a law on targeting these new groups. That would come later. But what the government did right off was make a one-off emergency payment to every worker who was listed in the Unified Social Security Contribution Register. So this was a very broad form of support. After that, the government quickly set up a system of cash payments to internally displaced persons. And this system included not only cash, but also subsidies for local governments who find housing for IDPs, and also subsidies for employers who hire them. And then, despite extremely tight resources, the government expanded allowances to replace lost wages for workers who stay home to care for sick or injured children or other immediate family members. So I want to emphasize the support for family caregivers has been a very, very high priority for the government of Ukraine. And then most recently, at the beginning of this year, the parliament authorized a cash social assistance benefit, which is available not only to the IDPs, to the internally displaced persons, but to all Ukrainians who are in difficult financial situations. So I think what we see here in terms of benefits is a very swift, broad response, followed by the creation of targeted benefits, first to IDPs, then to families with injured or sick kids, and then to all Ukrainians in financial need. Next one, please. So that's the benefit story. Now, how is the government reaching people who need those benefits? As Vasyl told us, the Russian invasion displaced more than 8 million Ukrainians. Some are living with friends and relatives in places that are new to them. Others have subsequently returned home to find that services are unavailable. And still other Ukrainians continue living in their communities, but in areas where Social Security offices have been forced to close. So what has the government done about this? Well, it's an interesting story. First of all, post offices. In regions of the country where the postal service is still operational, pensioners can go on the website of the Pension Fund of Ukraine and arrange postal delivery of a pension to their home address. Next, banks. Pensioners can receive payments directly from the State Savings Bank of Ukraine, which has offices all across the country, without even having to open a bank account. They need only to present a national ID and a tax number. Third, retail stores. The Pension Fund of Ukraine is issuing passwords to eligible beneficiaries that enable them to collect pension payments over the counter in many retail businesses, including department stores, pharmacies, and even gas stations. This is being done through an international payment system. In terms of receiving applications, the Pension Fund of Ukraine accepts benefit applications and other requests from a hotline, by email, and on its web portal. And that web portal has recently been linked to a national platform called DIA, which has further increased electronic access. But it was not always this way. It hasn't been this way since the very beginning days of the war. These are innovations that have been put in place over time. Before the DIA connection, social security workers were stretched to the limit. And Vasyl is going to provide us an example of those stressful days, followed by some of the solutions that were enacted in the city of Uman. Vasyl, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Elaine. It is difficult to imagine nowadays the chaos of the early days of the war, when millions of Ukrainians were on move without phone connection or internet, without access to relatives or social services. I had many communications with the regional and local social protection departments and units in those very difficult times. Unfortunately, even today, in some parts of Ukraine, it has not become easier. But I would like to share with you one success story. Halina Kucher, the head of the Social Protection Department of the Uman City Council, Cherkasy region, informed me that in the days of intense fighting near Kyiv city, her department worked 24 hours per 7 days and received personally between 85 and 280 people every day and night. They successfully registered these people as IDPs within 24 hours, then registered their application for social benefits, then helped them with their accommodation and social services. In this relatively small city, only 82,000 inhabitants, around 13,000 people were registered as IDPs. Among them, more than 4,000 are children, people with disabilities, and elderly persons. Almost 25% were registered on the digital platform. Since those early days, digital platforms have simplified this process, making life easier for both IDPs and social workers. And I would add that the work of the regional and local social protection departments units in this very difficult time has helped to prevent even greater migration of people from Ukraine abroad. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The last item on this slide has to do with matching requests for help with donors via a new platform called eDopomoga. This platform was created by the Ministry of Social Policy to respond to the tremendous increase in volunteerism in Ukraine that Vasyl told us about earlier. So on this platform, individuals who need help can write about that, and individuals who are looking to help can read their stories and what their needs are and be connected with them. I went on this website, and the website includes elaborate mechanisms for ensuring transparency in the use of cash gifts, including providing the receipts from the grocery store to the donor in some cases. And it's recently, eDopomoga has recently been expanded so that international donors also can use it to provide aid. Next slide, please. eDopomoga platform recently won a gold award from a technology magazine for its technical innovation in connecting, that slide says collecting, it should say connecting donors with those in need. Next slide, please. So the third area and final area that we want to tell you about is streamlining administration. I find it amazing that Ukraine, while fighting a war and reaching out to millions of people in need, has also found ways to save resources and target them toward its highest priority populations. And I want to mention 3 initiatives. One is the merger of Social Security institutions. Ukraine recently merged the Social Insurance Fund, which pays short-term benefits, with the Pension Fund of Ukraine. They chose the Pension Fund because the parliament did a study which showed that the Pension Fund is the most effective and efficient of the 2 institutions. And this merger is going to achieve economies of scale in administration. The government has also accelerated digitalization. Prior to the invasion, the Ukrainian social security schemes relied on more than 15 different types of software, some of which were developed way back in the 1990s. And these systems caused difficulties for the IDPs, the internally displaced persons, many of whom had to wait in long lines or wait a long time for eligibility decisions. In 2021, even before the invasion, the Ministry of Social Policy had launched a single IT system for all social programs. And this new system, new then and still in process now, has been further developed and accelerated during the war. And today it's saving money as well as reducing application processing times. In recent months, it has been linked to DIA, which we mentioned earlier, the main government platform, and this linkage also has the potential to further shorten times and conserve administrative resources. And the third one, suspension of benefit certifications. Every Social Security program needs from time to time to recertify the eligibility of certain beneficiaries, particularly people with disabilities and guardians of children and people with mental disabilities. But Ukraine has suspended these certifications until the end of martial law, in order to target the resources that would have been spent on them on its priority population, which is internally displaced persons. Next one, please. So those are the major innovations that we wanted to tell you about. Now let's spend a few minutes trying to account for Ukraine's successes. Its leaders are very clear on this, and it has been repeatedly stated, as it says in this slide, that among the government's priorities are first defense, but secondly, social protection of the population, especially citizens who are bearing the brunt of the trauma. Next one, please. And it's not just the policymaker's perspective. This kind of perspective percolates down to Social Security administrators and staff. And we found the words of one frontline worker very compelling. I'll just quickly read them. If we compare our current work with the work before the war, then clearly it was more calm and orderly. Now, if a staff member needs to go to a bomb shelter during a Zoom call, there can be no possibility of peaceful working conditions. But our effort now is still rapid and coordinated because we have overriding goals. We are inspired by our country. We want to be free and independent so that fewer of our fellow citizens cry, so that more lives are saved. This is what we are working for. And I believe that system users feel that commitment when they deal with Social Security institutions. And Vasil is going to illustrate this with a personal story from Bakhmut. Vasil?
Yeah, thank you, Elaine. I will speak on behalf and in the name of the person who was evacuated from Bakhmut. My name is Sergei Sokolov. 48 years old, and everything I will talk about next, I know firsthand. Fortunately, my mother, Larissa Sokolova, 72 years old, and I managed to evacuate from Bakhmut, where the most fierce battles are now taking place. But for 6 months, we, like all the rest of the people who remained in the city, lived without exaggeration in a hell. Today, I am often being asked, how did you survive there? And I answer this question all together. Thanks to volunteers, we moved to the city of Dobropilya, Donetsk region, where we were received by Irina Shirina, the head of the Social Protection Department of Dobropilya City Council. And it was much better than I could even hope. Very fast digital registration, of our IDP status, and 12 days later, we got our first IDP's payment. Only 1 hour we spent in the bank, Oshad Bank, to open with the help of the pension fund, the digital register, a new pension card for my mother. And this allowed the pension fund of Ukraine to transfer my mother's pension from Ukrposhta to her bank account. Separate housing, hot meals, medical care, maximum assistance in solving all emerging issues. And all this is completely free. So I will also classify social workers as guardian angels. It was they who gave us silence again. We no longer hear explosions. We are not afraid to die, and we hope for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think in a nutshell, social solidarity is very high in Ukraine, and as a result of that, social security is priority. But there's another factor that I want to mention in explaining this outstanding performance of the government, and that is, next slide, please, something called the benefit of crisis. This is I wrote theory here, but I would say it's really kind of an observation made often by political scientists, that crises can open doors to new policies that are needed and desirable, but were blocked politically under the status quo or not implementable for some other reason. And so we have seen the benefit of crisis at work in Ukraine in accelerating digitalization, in widening outreach, as the government has found new and very creative ways to identify eligible people and pay benefits, in consolidation of institutions in order to boost administrative efficiency, and in the temporary offload of non-essential functions in order to target benefits on the highest priority targets. Next slide, please. So this is not to say that Ukraine's social security system is working perfectly. There are major problems and challenges, and in closing, I'll just mention a few of these. Possibly the greatest one is that the social security institutions are still not able to reach people in occupied areas or in many conflict areas, where the postal service is spotty and banks do not work reliably to pay benefits in these areas, as I described earlier.
Yes, and so we had their 40th high school reunion. Okay. It was all catered. It was really nice.
Someone
a lot of fun, a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you. A second problem is unserved IDPs. There are still a large number of IDPs who are still not registered and therefore not qualified for benefits, or who are trying to register but who have encountered delays due to the antiquated software that's still in use in some parts of Ukraine that I described earlier, and also due to glitches in the new software systems that are being put in place. And finally, the government faces absolutely huge challenges in anticipating the day when people who left the country will return, particularly migrants with disabilities or children without parents. There has to be a lot done to get ready for the return of those children. And the government also faces enormous challenges in supporting and rehabilitating and finding employment for Ukrainians who were disabled by the war. This is an absolutely staggering challenge facing the government. But these challenges, weighty as they are, should not obscure Ukraine's accomplishments in this time of crisis and enormous distress. So we conclude that today social security policymakers, administrators, and frontline workers are really giving the full measure of their effort to meet the needs of their fellow citizens and to address the absolutely enormous challenges in front of them Unfortunately, their stories are largely absent from media coverage. But these Ukrainians deserve our recognition and certainly our moral support. So that's what we wanted to tell you today, and we would be glad to take questions. Particularly, I think Vasil will be the most qualified to address questions you may have. Thank you. Can we move on to?
Suzanne, you're on mute. Suzanne?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Forgive me as I'm trying to go back into the Zoom page. Okay, I think I'm here. All right, we have, I really apologize for this because I just don't know how to get back onto the chat box on the Zoom. I see you, Donna, but that's all I see. So I remember that Jack Kupperman had some questions, and if you would unmute Jack Kupperman from the Gray Panthers, I think he would like to ask those questions.
Okay, thank you. I'll just read what I put in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
This presentation is quite interesting. From what I recall, the distribution for pensions and other forms of social protection in Ukraine had been inadequate. This is from what I understood 10 years ago. Your presentation indicates that much progress in distributing assistance has occurred in recent years. Bravo. The innovations you describe, retail establishments, digital connections, and others are impressive. What changes still need to occur? What can civil society do to enhance the distribution of assistance in Ukraine? That's it.
Mm-hmm.
If
I think Elaine and Vasil are both
Elaine.
unmuted now.
okay,
I'm unmuted, yes.
Vasil, both.
I would encourage you to look at the website that I mentioned, eDopomoga, which is, I think, an ingenious way for people who want to help to find people who need help in Ukraine. It's been translated into several languages. I read it in English. And as I mentioned, there are elaborate provisions on that website for providing assurance to the donor that funds are used as intended. In addition, the ministry, I know that the Ministry of Social Policy is actively searching for modern software. So any organization that is in the position to help with the completion of digitalization, which is playing such an important role in outreach, could certainly contribute importantly by helping with that. Vasil, would you like to add?
Yeah, first of all, what is society looking for further reforms? First of all, I would like to emphasize that the current reforms, so to join or to merge the pension fund and the social insurance fund was very important because it was a saving of administrative cost. First, the fear in the society was that this merger will abolish some social insurance benefits. But it's not the case. That's why the government and the parliament have to organize more information, more explanations to the society. The next step, which the government and the parliament are planning to do, to merge also the unemployment fund. So it's important on one hand, because the administrative cost of the unemployment fund, which is also serving the public employment service, is about 14% of the total budget. That's why in these days when we are so poor with our state budget, we cannot spend so much money for administrative cost, instead to pay to the unemployed people, and to support active labor market policy. In the role of the reforms of the government and of the parliament is the implementation of the mandatory pension scheme, and it's under huge debates starting from the 1996. So, and people, we have different opinions. One part of society, especially young people, saying yes, it would be okay, but other part of society is telling that in this situation, when we do not have developed markets, it will not work. And taking in account big inflation rate, so how this will save the contributions of the employers of the government, because it's the proposal that these contributions to this fund will be made by the government and the employers and not by the employees. So that's why it's a little bit funny, but anyway, it's the way which is under discussion of Ukraine. The next issue is the Medicare, health care, because we still do not have health insurance in Ukraine, and the war has demonstrated that people became more poor, and do not have enough finance to pay for for many medicine, and also for those surgery operations, etc. So that's why it's also on the agenda of the government and of the society. But I'm not sure that this will happen very soon, because as I told, we lost many people at the labor market. And it's a question how the labor market will look like after the victory. So that's why it's who will pay for all these funds. Thank you.
Okay, in terms of the chat box, I see many, many names, and they're all complimenting the speakers and the program and so on, but I don't see any additional questions. So I'm going to ask you to, I see a hand, I see Donna's hand, and I was going to take the prerogative to ask a question myself. But I just want to say, if you do have questions, and I hope you do, please either put them in the chat box or raise your hand to be recognized. So my question, if I may, is I want to commend the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian institutions, for doing yeoman service under the most difficult circumstances. And I think the story is getting out, and that's a good thing. But I also know, at least in the United States, we're starting to see a split, a division about support for all these efforts. So I'm really asking a question about PR. How do you think, or what do you think can be done to find one platform to get your message out to the American people, to the European people, so that there is, people will know, if I need information, I can go here?
As Elaine told already, we have this Ukrainian e-Dopomoga, is help platform. So, and this platform is the very good bridge between the Ukrainian people and donors, international organizations or governments. So because our government is not dealing with the funding which can be offered to our consumers, to our people. So it's only offered this e-platform. So that's why it's no risk of corruption and other things which unfortunately sometimes happening. So that's why it's one of the best way would be to promote this e-Dopomoga platform as well as in the United States, from my point of view.
I appreciate that, but I must confess it's the first time I've heard of it is this afternoon. Would it be helpful to find some donors to put a big ad in the New York Times or elsewhere so that it becomes more visible? That's my suggestion, and I don't know how to do that, but that's what I hope you end up doing.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's a topic that is very, very worthy of further discussion. And perhaps we could have some further discussions of it after this meeting, because we in NACI have tried quite hard to get PR for these outstanding efforts. We wrote, in addition to the paper that Bill Arnone and I wrote, we wrote some op-eds and we contacted some journalists, but we hadn't really been able to get this into the headlines. And I think it's a story. It's a good story. It's an encouraging story, and we ought to try again.
I agree. Donna, you had a question before.
I did, thank you. And I did want to, Suzanne mentioned this, but I did want to actually verbatim read one of the chat room quotes, which was from Laura Nebel, who said, "Elaine, you are a treasure." So I wanted to make sure that we got that across. And I would say, Vasile, both of you, so very much appreciate all that you've done and the collaboration that you have, because while the word needs to get out even further, you are getting the word out. And we're really grateful that you're participating today in this symposium. But one thing that you said interested me, which was the benefits of crisis. Mm-hmm. And while I think none of us would want a crisis like such as what currently exists with the war, it did make me wonder, though, were there reforms underway or under consideration before the war, and then that were then escalated as a result of that benefit of crisis? And then also, I was very interested when you said that family caregiving was a high priority in terms of the response. And I was wondering what sort of family caregiver supports were in place before, and are there, in addition to the financial benefit, are there other supports that are envisioned or are underway for family caregivers? Thank you.
I could just say a little, and then I'm sure Vasile can say more. Digitalization is an example of a reform that was in the pipeline that got a big push, a huge push as a result of the war. And it's still a work in progress. And I think the jury is still out on the overall effort, because we really can't. Can you hear me?
No.
Yes.
Something happened here.
Now you're good.
You're good, Elaine.
Yeah. There's still delays and there's still antiquated equipment in place. So it's a work in progress. But I think that's an example of benefit of crisis, giving reforms a kick. And also, I think that the merger of institutions, as Vasile mentioned, with high administrative costs, was a reform whose time was overdue. We know that in Social Security schemes all around the world, there are huge economies of scale from having one organization administer benefits over a large geographic area. But Ukraine had and has multiple agencies and some duplication in services. So that also is a good example. In terms of family caregiving, as I understand it, this was perhaps I could let Vasile explain it better, but was being phased in gradually, beginning back in 2014 after Crimea. And I think that my impression is that the war also resulted in further acceleration of a phased in caregiver benefit. Vasil, maybe you can say it better.
I would thank you, Elaine and Donna. Thank you for your question. First of all, I would like to add that this caregivers story started during the pandemic, COVID pandemic. So because many people who, for example, could not go to the hospitals or could not work without providing care for elderly or people or mother or father or for children with disability. So and it was also this restriction for the outsider to come and to take care. So that's why this idea of the Ministry of Social Policy was very fast accepted and approved by the government of Ukraine. Another thing, when we are speaking that the targeted benefits and targeted support for families, so it's more now very important issue for the Ministry of Social Policy, and not only for the Ministry of Social Policy, as well as for the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, is the institutionalization of education and growing children, because we have inherited the old Soviet system of this closed schools, internats, etc., for the children with disabilities, etc. That's why the idea of the previous minister, as well as of the, especially of the current Minister of Social Policy, Oksana Zhalnovich, is to promote deinstitutionalization and adoption of the children in the family. Return to the families or adoption in other families of these children. So, and in this case, again, the adopted parents are considered like physical or natural parents. So with benefits, with the maternity leave, with take care for the child, all other things. So that's why it's a more broader consideration and of this issue, and it supports this problem. Now we have in Ukraine more than 2.6 million. Before the war, we had more than 2.6 million people with disabilities. Only 10 months of the war brought additional 100 people with disabilities, among them many children. So, and we don't know the exact picture, because we don't know what is happening or what happened in the occupied territories. So that's why it's one of the issues will be again to outreach these families after the occupation. So, and in relations to the IDPs, one issue which we did not mention, that the housing, the accommodation of the people is one of the acute issue, because houses or apartments have been destroyed after the bombarding and in different cities and villages. So, and That's why the people are looking for housing, for accommodation, not only in the social sector, but also in the house or apartments owners. That's why the government has approved a special decision that the owners who offer the accommodation for IDPs will be paid for this service. It's now in the winter time, it's $1 per person a month. Certainly it's not too much, but if you consider that many people are living in villages, so, and this is very important for the owners of houses to pay for firewoods or other things or for gas. So that's why it's one of the important issue which was approved by the government also.
Okay, I see another question, and it will probably be our last question for today, but I know that many of us will want to continue this discussion. So I'm asking that anyone who wants to continue the discussion, if you would each kindly send me an email so that we can create a database of people who participated today, and to send it either to the NGO committee that I had up on top, or to me personally at SuzanneSepperson@gmail.com. And also, I hope, Lydia Jimenez, that your question on crises was answered. The last question, before I turn it over to Kevin, is from Josephine Tyne, which I think is a profound question. And that is trauma counseling available that is or will be made available to affected persons?
Trauma?
Trauma counseling.
Yeah, it's one of the very serious issues for the country, because the government started this different ministries, because we have not only the Ministry of Social Policy, but we have Ministry of Veterans, we have the fund of the disabled, for protection of disabled persons, but also the Ministry of Education and Health and Sciences have started different programs on rehabilitation, psychological, sociological, social rehabilitation, post-trauma rehabilitation, and this issue is also a part of the work of our volunteer organizations, because I know many people, friends of mine, who, because I used to work when I worked for the ILO, to help the Ukraine to create the system of vocation rehabilitation centers for the persons with disabilities. And many people who I know, even persons with disability who have been trained in this center, started now the volunteers to provide with the professional psychologists these services of rehabilitation. So that's why Elaine, the challenge, has mentioned this issue, rehabilitation, in more broader of persons with disability, but we are considering this in more broader sense, not only those who got disability, but almost all people who used to live in occupied territories. A friend of mine who was living and still is living in Kherson city, so she has psychological trauma. So because even now the city under bombarding, so under strikes, and she writes to me, Vasil, we are afraid that one day bomb will target our house. So that's why these people also will need to receive psychological rehabilitation and consultation, etc. So, and last week I spoke with our family doctor, and she told me that now all medical doctors have special training how to deal with these issues with their patients in the hospitals or in the polyclinics, providing their medical care services. Thank you for this question. It's
Thank you.
very important.
Yes, I agree. I'm going to ask one question that will take a very short answer from both of you. And that is that although no one has a crystal ball, can you prognosticate and guess how much longer this war will last?
Nobody will tell this. So because nobody can think like Putin is thinking. So what he will invent in the next hours or days, what we are aware or afraid that he will start new attacks against Ukraine in order to celebrate 12 months of this special military operations, as Putin has called this war. So that's why it's difficult to forecast when it will happen, our victory. So, but frankly speaking, most of the population, I read some times ago the sociological study that almost 78% of people are sure that we will win this year.
Amen. Elaine, any final words?
Oh, it's above my pay grade. You know, I wouldn't dare to say, but I can say that though we don't know when, we do know the result, because we know that the Ukrainian people have what it takes. I mean, they have the patriotism, the pride, the solidarity, and the people power. And in the end, those things are more important than bombs. So we can't, unfortunately, give the timeline.
Yeah.
But in terms of the components of success, I think it's very one-sided.
Okay, and so before I turn it back to Kevin, I just want to read what Josephine Tyne wrote that said, I would be glad to hear more about these issues as our NGO, Concepts of Truth, Inc. has various resources for trauma counseling. My email is unitednationsNGO@conceptsoftruth.org. So I share that with you in the event that you want to follow up. And again, from my end, thank you to all of you. Kevin, please.
Okay, wow, that was moving, inspiring. What can I say? Anyway, thank you so much. Just wanted to thank Bill Unknown as well, who was the first person I spoke to about setting this meeting up, and who introduced me to Elaine and then Basil. And I think it's shown the last thing we wanted to do in our series on social security systems in terms of addressing poverty, extreme poverty, with the social protection programs connected to social security, and the ability to really sustain all of those things. So this is the last one in the series. We spoke about on previous sessions on the economic stimulus provided by social protection programs reported in the UN's 2018 World Social Situation publication. They cited a number of studies done by the International Labour Organization, and it's also consistent with economic theory that we know from velocity of money. This is the impact of circulation on GDP. So money that goes into a community from a well-intentioned base and an expression of intergenerational solidarity also helps to stimulate the economy, which provides a broader impact than only to the recipients. This is something we hope to also convince governments of. So this is the last piece to show that these programs are sustainable. Not only sustainable, there is no historical situation where a social security system has ever been abandoned. So all countries that adopt them maintain a great commitment to keeping them in place. And we see in the Ukraine the amazing creativity that can happen when a country has this determination. So we will be moving ahead, and this is the last thing I just wanted to point to. One of the main goals of the Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity is to encourage the UN to set up a department that would provide technical assistance to governments willing and interested in providing one or two of the social protection programs in conjunction with the social security system. It is our belief that these programs will be sustained and that they will address not only extreme poverty, but poverty in general. They target, of course, disparate groups. So they are very inclusive by their very nature. And we encourage you, if you've enjoyed this presentation today, to join with us. We will be putting in another petition to the Commission on the Status of Women this year, as we did last year, to see what support is generated. We had 33 NGOs and 4 committees that endorsed the petition last year to set up exactly this type of department of the UN. And we will circulate it earlier this year, and we hope you will join us in solidarity, intergenerational and concerned people, that we can make this happen, we can be real, and we can find a number of countries that can move fairly quickly to establish some of these programs. This will be the one of the ways that we envision being a way to speed up the Sustainable Development Goals implementation in the period where COVID certainly interrupted the progress along that 15-year pathway. We think we can speed it up, and we believe this is one way that it can be done. So thank you again, Elaine and Bill, and Vasil. We just really appreciate your time and effort on this. You have really made a great day for us. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Peace to all.